My name is Brandon Woodruff. I'm 31 years old. I was arrested for capital murder in the deaths of my parents, Norma and Dennis Woodruff, and I did not commit this crime.
Setting: the sleepy town of Royce City, Texas. To most, this place is nothing more than a convenient stop when traveling Interstate 30. Once upon a time, it was nothing more than a tiny farming community. A couple of ancient silos, more than likely used for grain or corn, can still be seen from the busy thoroughfare, as though time could stand still upon taking the exit ramp. To the citizens of this tiny community, it's home, close to the conveniences of Dallas, but still small enough to give you the feel of country living. Modern progress is slowly changing all of that, though. Today, the town's main drag is filled with tiny restaurants, bars with music venues, and even a microbrewery. But in the fall of 2005, it was the typical shadow of small-town America. Two of its residents, Dennis and Norma Woodruff, were going about their normal lives, getting ready for bed and work the next morning. On that exact same night, the couple's children were going about their daily lives. Their daughter Charla was preparing for her morning classes at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia, Arkansas. Their son Brandon was spending time at a local dance club in Dallas. Although both would be affected by the events of the next 24 hours,
Did you kill your parents?
Nope.
only one would be robbed of everything they knew.
In a jailhouse interview, Brandon Woodruff denied stabbing and shooting his parents in the neck and face.
For Brandon, this would be the last time he would ever visit a club.
I'm in here for something I didn't do. I've got to stick up for myself now. If you know what I'm saying? I mean, I can't. I mean, I've never been used to this at all.
He would no longer be able to show any of his many prized animals at the blue ribbon competitions.
Having to use the bathroom in front of somebody else, having to be in cuffs, sitting here talking to you, this is crazy.
And he would never taste the freedoms we all take for granted, ever again.
The murders took place in this Royce City mobile home in mid-October. Investigators say there were no signs of a struggle, and it appeared the victims knew their attacker. But the freshman at Abilene Christian University says he was close to his parents.
We always had a good relationship. If I had a problem, they were there to answer it. I mean, I had everything.
In this arrest affidavit, Woodruff's sister claims their parents were borderline abusive and that Brandon inherited his father's temper.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the American Justice Podcast. This is the Season 1 overview, just a small taste of things to come.
I used to believe in the law 100%, and now it makes me take a turn because they have nothing on me. All that affidavit is hearsay.
In the affidavit, a former high school classmate claims Woodruff wrote that he hated his parents and he wished they were dead.
I mean, the truth will come out one day, and then I hope that the investigators feel sorry for what they've done.
But the Hunt County DA says the evidence will speak for itself.
He's certainly entitled to his opinion, but we'll decide, the jury's going to decide that when we have a trial.
C. Derick Miller is an author, producer, and gonzo journalist from the conservative community of Greenville, Texas. Sam Cloud Miller is a graphic artist and a liberal civil rights activist from Austin, Texas. Combine those two and what do you have? Magic. Recorded in the Bishop Arts District of Dallas, it's a podcast that is sure to never disappoint. They talk about books, film, music, today's topics, and life in general. Even though they may disagree on the topics from time to time, they'll always kiss and make up. It's a practice that America needs to relearn, don't you think? No filters, no scripts, and no schedule. Catch the Butterflies Make Me Angry podcast on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Peace to the peaceful, truth to the masses, hell to the tyrants. Get all the details at cderickmiller.com.
Today, I will be taking you through the facts and evidence of the Brandon Woodruff Capital Murder case. My name is Scott Poggensee, and I currently live in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and have since 1984. I wasn't originally born in Texas, but I have lived here long enough to consider myself a Texan. Just ask anyone from around these parts and they'll tell you that's a huge deal. I've always been interested in true crime stories, but especially became interested in the, quote, wrongful conviction part of it when I first started watching Perry Mason back in the day.
Did Justin Grover tell you his visitor was a woman? A woman he'd been seeing for years, secretly?
No. No, it isn't true.
He actually inspired me to want to become a criminal defense attorney. I always knew no matter what I did, I would have a career that would put me in a position to help people and promote fairness and justice in our society. Ultimately, I decided that the medical field was where my heart led me. I became an emergency medical technician. Although I never realized the dreams of becoming a criminal defense attorney, I continued to be interested in cases where the person convicted of a crime turned out to be innocent. I did not know Brandon when his parents were murdered. Because I lived in Dallas-Fort Worth, just like most other people in this community, I heard about it on the news. I always found it odd that they were arresting this fresh-faced looking 19-year-old for such a heinous crime. Yet he was screaming his innocence every chance he had. So ultimately, I just followed the case like everyone else. In fact, I went on with my normal everyday life and just found myself searching his name every once in a while, mostly when it just popped into my head out of nowhere. In 2009, while driving down the highway, I ended up thinking about Brandon and decided to see if the case had gone to trial yet. As soon as I arrived home, I let my fingers do the walking right over my keyboard. Much to my shock, I saw that not only had he gone on trial, but he was convicted. His parents were both killed, and 3.5 years later, Brandon Woodruff was convicted of capital murder. This really bothered me because there was just something about Brandon that didn't seem like he would be capable of committing this crime. So I did like any other true crime aficionado would do. I wrote him a letter. It took time, almost a year, but he finally wrote back. He was very skeptical. He didn't know if I was telling him my true identity or what my true intentions really were. Although honestly, I didn't even know what my true intentions were. I guess I just wanted to hear from his own words that he was innocent, and not just from the newspaper quotes. Eventually, we exchanged a few letters, and he invited me to not take his word for the fact that he was innocent, but to get with his friend Edie and get a copy of all of the trial evidence to read over everything and make my own conclusion. I took him up on it, and next thing I knew, I was calling this wonderfully nice lady named Edie, even though I knew what I wanted even less than she knew what I wanted. However, I did know at that point I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I had to do something. So after researching the case for hundreds, if not thousands of hours, and reading over the 100,000 or so documents related to this case, I came to the conclusion that Brandon really is innocent. If I believed that there was even a 1% chance that Brandon was guilty, I wouldn't be here. As you'll see throughout this podcast, the facts to bring about Brandon's exoneration exist in black and white already. All I did was look over and study the evidence from a non-biased point of view. It's unfortunate, but it's the very same evidence that was penned by those same badges society insists that we trust. Now, be rest assured, I'm not the only one that believes in Brandon's innocence. There does exist a large group of people who believe in Brandon. However, those who seek comfort with the trust and abilities of their local law enforcement officials are satisfied with the decision of guilt. For now, let's get started with a little background on the Brandon Woodruff case. In the beginning of 2005, Dennis and Norma Woodruff owned a brick home in Heath, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Again, just like the town of Royce City, Texas, the community of Heath is currently a target for wealthy new homeowners to escape nearby big city life without traveling too far away from the view of the Dallas skyline. Back in 2005, however, Heath was made up of small, rural neighborhoods all connected by a 2-lane road. It was a perfect home for the Woodruff family's animal population and the majority of their belongings until their new home in Royce City was able to accommodate them all. The Woodruff's daughter Charla had graduated from Rockwall High School the previous year and was a sophomore attending college at Southern Arkansas University. She had been a Rockwall High School Stingerette, the institution's dance team who performed during football games. She also competed with show animals in a similar fashion to her brother. Brandon, who had just graduated from high school in May of that year, was attending Abilene Christian University to be close to his best friend, Eric Gentry. By the time school started in September of 2005, Dennis and Norma purchased the mobile home in nearby Royce City and were in the process of moving when they were tragically murdered. At the time of their death, they had 2 houses, one in Heath, where they had lived for almost 10 years, and one in Royce City that they were in the slow process of moving into. This is an important detail because there are significant activities that take place at both locations, the brick home in Heath and the new mobile home approximately 20 minutes away in Royce City. According to family members outside of the household, Charla was an attention-seeking, mild-mannered girl who rarely associated with anyone outside of her personal circle of friends, but always insisted on being the, quote, life of the party. Brandon, on the other hand, appeared to be well-liked within many circles and associated with several people throughout high school, but he had a particular close-knit group of friends before graduation. His MySpace page displayed photographs exhibiting a deep-rooted love for his horses and affection for a more natural, simpler lifestyle than that of his sibling. Although from the same parents, the 2 of them couldn't have been more different. A perfect example of night and day disassociation. Unlike the childhood photographs adorning the walls of the family home displaying their smiling faces on vacations, the 2 of them had grown apart once they entered their teenage years. They transitioned into the aforementioned personalities and, as you'll hear in later episodes, cared little for each other's company. Charla described the relationship as a strong dislike and would eventually make claims of severe sibling rivalry. Brandon would simply call it, quote, 2 different people with 2 different sets of interests. According to both, however, as is typical with relationships between an aging brother and sister, the love still remained. Philip Crawford Jr., a retired attorney who heard about Brandon's case and decided to write a book about it, described Brandon's friend group this way.
Throughout most of high school, Brandon ran with the shit kickers, boys like himself involved with showing livestock and dressing cowboy. In addition to Brandon, the pack comprised Michael Mike Etherington, Joseph Joe Hageman, and Dustin Dusty Perry. The 4 boys ate lunch together at a round table in the school cafeteria, and Mike said all of us were real close, like brothers, and had each other's back.
Remember those 3 names, Mike Etherington, Joe Hageman, and Dusty Perry. They play a significant role in the events to come. Although part of his past, they had little to do with Brandon's idea of the future. The days of high school and small-town life were over. Brandon was living the high life in the big city with credit cards and cash he was making from modeling jobs. He no longer had time for childhood cowboy friends who refused to see the larger picture. Ultimately, Brandon's only desired activities when occasionally returning to the small towns in Rockwall County was to visit his parents and lovingly care for the animals he'd left behind when venturing off to college. Mix that with a little bit of nightlife in big city Dallas once he turned 18, and childhood friendships were nothing but memories. Hey, life was good, and life went on. This philosophy struck sour chords between the old friends, especially Mike Etherington. Through text message conversations, which we'll discuss in future episodes, the former friends damned Brandon's new lifestyle in an almost envious, perhaps jealous way. Now, let's get to the night in question, the night that would forever change everything. October 16th, 2005. At approximately 9 p.m., Norma Woodruff was running through her nightly routine of speaking to her mother, Opal Johnston, on the phone. Norma was in the new Royce City home and Opal in her home in Texarkana, Texas. While they were speaking on the phone, Charla, Norma's daughter, happened to be at Opal's house. Opal asked Charla if she would like to speak with her mother, and Charla replied no thanks, as she was about to leave and to, quote, "Just tell Mom that I will call her when I get home." Magnolia, Arkansas is approximately 45 miles east of Texarkana, where Charla attended school. Norma and her mother Opal spoke on the phone for about 20 or 30 minutes, hung up around 9:30 p.m., and went about their evenings. When Charla arrived at her dorm room, she called Norma to say goodnight. It was 10:59 p.m. according to the phone records. To Charla's surprise, Norma didn't answer the phone. This was odd because some 90 minutes prior, her grandmother Opal had just relayed her message that she'd be calling when she got home. Ultimately, she chalked it up to coincidence and went about her evening. The next day, Charla would call several more times, but again, there would be no answer from her parents. That evening, Charla would call the Royce City home phone, Dennis's cell phone, and Norma's cell phone repeatedly. In fact, she would attempt to call her parents some 8 times between 5:30 p.m. and 2 a.m. Even though, reportedly, she would be worried out of her mind at this point, Charla did not try again until almost 2 p.m. the next day. Over the next several hours, there would be an abundance of calls made to all 3 of her parents' phones. Common to families in the 1990s and early 2000s, the Woodruffs had call forwarding set up on their main home phone so that calls not answered on the landline would rotate around to each cell phone in the group. Then, if the call was not answered by any of the phones, it would finally go to an answering machine. Charla also called her brother Brandon's phone in Abilene on that Tuesday, along with some family and some friends who lived in the Dallas-Rockwall area. Brandon shared with his sister that he also had not talked to their parents since Sunday. He and Charla split up the duties of calling around to Dennis and Norma's friends to see if they had heard from the couple. Eventually, Charla called her parents' work just to be told that neither of them had shown up to work on Monday or Tuesday. It was finally decided amongst the family around 3 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th that they would call a family friend, Todd Williams, to conduct a welfare check on Dennis and Norma at their Royce City home. He grabbed a buddy from work, Ron Merritt, and they headed to Royce City. The Royce City home was almost completely isolated, with the closest neighbors being at least a half a mile away. When Todd and Ron arrived on the scene, they noticed both Dennis and Norma's vehicles in the driveway of the residence, as it normally would be on any typical day when they weren't at work. both men's stomachs became uneasy with the multiple possibilities of what could be keeping the couple from a simple task, such as answering the phone. More fears were realized when they reached the front door to discover that it was locked. Imagining the worst, the men decided to gain entrance into the house through a side window after receiving permission from a concerned family member. Their eyes adjusted to the darkness which filled the inside of the home, only to notice the shadowed outlines of their friends slumped together on their living room sofa. At first glance, it could have appeared to the casual observer that the couple had simply fallen asleep after a long afternoon of television, taking full advantage of their mutual absence from their day jobs, except for one gruesome detail. The two of them were covered with blood and wounds that would ultimately prove fatal. Todd and Ron immediately exited the house and called the Hunt County Sheriff's Department. According to Ron Merritt's statement, he returned to the grisly scene just to verify he wasn't hallucinating. He literally could not believe his eyes. He ultimately realized they were both indeed dead. Ron would later go on to explain that he wasn't sure if they had been victims of murder or if it was some type of murder-suicide. Their minds continued to wonder about the possibilities as they patiently waited for the sheriff's office to arrive. As is customary with gruesome and complex crimes in their small county, the sheriff's deputies enlisted the assistance of the state's top law enforcement group, the Texas Rangers. Ranger Sergeant Jeffrey Collins was appointed as the lead investigator for the case. At 9:02 p.m., the investigation into the Woodruff's murders would begin. This is the point where rationality begins to cease, where lives are changed, and where the thousands of questions that start being asked never find answers. Brandon's defense attorney, Catherine Ferguson, sums it all up very well.
The sheriff deputies decided that it would be important for the jury to see the house as they found it. So they didn't turn on any lights, and they go stumbling through the house in the dark, filming and knocking things over, because there's stuff that you can see in frames looks one way when they're filming it in the dark, and then after the lights are turned on, you see that it's been knocked sideways or stepped on or whatever. So how did they know what they may or may not have been contaminating, destroying, messing up to film a crime scene in the dark with no lights on? I mean, that to me was just stupid.
Next time on the American Justice Podcast, we will look into the beginning of the investigation conducted to determine who murdered Norma and Dennis Woodruff. We intend the American Justice Podcast to be as interactive as possible. One of the ways we do that is to answer your questions on our YouTube channel. That episode is recorded on Tuesday evenings and published to YouTube every Friday morning. If you would like your question answered on this week's episode, make sure that you submit your question before Tuesday evening. You can ask us in several different ways. The first and preferred way is by leaving us a voicemail. Please remember that if you do leave us a voicemail, your voice may be used on air. If you would not like your voice used, please state so in your message. The voicemail number is 972-942-0444. The next way you can drop us a line is on our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Also, if you would like to blog about the case, you can do so at AmericanJusticePodcast.com. As always, your comments and opinions are welcomed, but please be respectful of everyone's opinion. We encourage healthy debate and look forward to hearing what each and every one of you has to say. Our normal recorded episodes will be released every Sunday morning, And as mentioned, we'll publish the Q&A episode every Friday morning. Until then, remember, stay aware, stay strong, and get involved.
This American Justice podcast has been recorded and produced by Atua Productions, LLC. The theme music has been written and performed by Josh DeRosa. All content contained in this episode is copyrighted and may not be copied or disseminated without the express written consent of Atua Productions, LLC. Any questions about today's episode can be directed to info@atuaproductions.com or mailed to 10455 North Central Expressway, Suite 109-406, Dallas, Texas, 75231. 1.